Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the final session of the technology track. As you can see, for the sustainable technologies in the developing world. We have an exciting panel here. Unfortunately, Gordon Cressman has not been able to make it today, so he'll be missing the action today. But we have Jim here who'll be moderating the panel. We're really excited to have him. And I'll let him take over from here. He'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we have half an hour of question answer at the end, so please feel free to save your questions for that.
Thanks, Bruno. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, well, welcome. We're coming down the home stretch. There's only this and something else afterwards. I wanted to just tell you just a little bit about me and how I found myself here, but really this is about the panelists. I'm actually here locally, but only recently. I've been all over the world for the last 10 or 15 years with a fairly deep set of experiences relevant to today's topic. For a long time, I managed Fiji Water's operation in Fiji. I also did a number of water developments throughout the Pacific and in different components of Africa. And along the way, I learned quite a bit about two things. One, the lack of industry support for those that were trying to develop innovative water solutions in general. There's a lot of technology in water, but not necessarily a lot of technology that has made itself readily available, particularly to industry, in ways that they can use. And that led to me forming the company that I lead now, Rethink H2O. We help large-scale water users dramatically reduce the amount of water they use through a combination of process, systems and technology, and strategic work. But independent to that, when I was with Fiji Water and subsequent to that, I spent a lot of time trying to develop solutions to the kind of problems that we all are concerned with, not only here in the States, but in the developing world. And one of those was clearly access to water, and bringing technology, whether you might call it appropriate technology or the models that we think might work, into those settings, and learning a fair amount about what does or doesn't work there. When I was with the Fiji Water Foundation, we were very successful at delivering water projects. My team and I did 40 while I was there. They've gone on to do well over 100 since I left. And so we've learned a little bit about how that model both didn't work initially and how it eventually started to work, that we can talk about. And also, when I did some work in Africa, and some of the panelists here are much better prepared to talk about that because they have much more successful ventures in Africa. But trying to figure out how to plug process and technology into commonplace problems, but into developing economies and cultures that sometimes doesn't mean that things go as smoothly as you'd like. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce the other panelists. We'll start with Will from Google, but by way of Chapel Hill.
Hello. Hello. Hey, everybody. My name is Will Patrick. I work at a place called Google X. It's Google's hardware lab. We do sort of all these sort of out there crazy technologies. We have a self-driving car. We have a heads-up display that's called Project Glass. My specific role at Google X is a rapid evaluator. So I'm on a small sort of skunkworks team within the skunkworks that's supposed to be figuring out what we're doing next. So that means a lot of rapid prototyping, coming up with new ideas, but it's basically trying to figure out the question of what should we build. So you might be asking why I at this session. I'm originally from Chapel Hill, went to school here at Duke for undergrad, was a mechanical engineer. And while at Duke, as well as a little bit after, I spent basically 4 years of my life building different technologies for emerging markets. So I was in India for a while, Uganda, did projects from water, energy, healthcare, all over the map, both sort of appropriate technology products as well as ones that were created from more of a startup or a corporate product development process. So I'm quite passionate about it and have a lot of experience mostly from sort of the engineering point of view. But now I've been at Google and Google X, so I have a slightly different viewpoint now than I did when I was working on it. So hopefully I'll get that across.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alla Jezmir, and I'm here representing a small social enterprise that operates in Tanzania called EGG Energy. It stands for Engineering Global Growth. EGG provides energy services to communities that are not connected to the electricity grid. There are several ways. One is that we rent out small electrical batteries. They can power lights, mobile phones, and radios, basically the very essential basic energy services. We also just recently started deploying solar rooftop installations for small businesses and homes now that PV prices have dropped so dramatically in the last several years. The company was founded by a team of MIT engineering PhDs, MBAs from Harvard, and policy students from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And over the last 3 or 4 years on the ground, we've learned a tremendous amount. We've had to pivot quite a bit in terms of our business model. We actually started out, I think this is kind of an important point to highlight now, thinking we would go and do solar PV installations. And at the time, the pricing market study revealed that the upfront cost was just too high. And that's where the battery swapping idea was born. And essentially what we do is we tap at the end of a transmission line, charge batteries, and we rent these batteries to families who can kind of call it Netflix for batteries. They come, they grab a battery. We do the electrical installation in their homes, including the lights, the fixtures, the wiring, and so it's actually plug and play ready for when and if the electricity lines ever extend to these regions, it'll be interoperable. And when the battery is depleted, our customers bring it back and they swap it for a freshly charged one. And we're doing a lot of experiments, and it's been a little bit over 3.5 years on the ground, and we currently have 800 customers, 20 distribution partners, like our agents, and a team of 17 people on the ground, and we're in a really important kind of refining and retuning and preparing for scale phase. My own personal background, I have been focused on energy issues for the last 10 years. I worked for the Calvert after receiving my joint degree from Harvard with MBA and an MPA. I joined Calvert Foundation, where I developed the Green Investment Initiative, the strategy, and deployed over $10 million in domestic and international loans for organizations that are at the intersection of poverty alleviation and environmental and sustainability. And the last 2.5 years, until just very recently, I was part of the AES Corporation and their business development group, working on business development of new power generation assets and energy. I worked with our energy storage team, and most recently focused on the global gas strategy. And I'll hand it over to... Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sonali Kathari. I'm with Kiva.org, and I thank these wonderful panelists because they actually gave a great intro and transition into talking about how Kiva plugs into some of the challenges and opportunities that they talked about. So Kiva really is about the financing, and I heard a lot of them mention that there's a lot of constraint in terms of bringing these technologies to scale for the developing markets. And this is a growth area for Kiva. So it's something that we are focusing more energy on, is bringing capital to these amazing sustainable technologies. So one example, I'll talk about one of our partners, Barefoot Power. They're trying to bring safe and clean energy to a community that doesn't have as much. And there's an importer named Daniel who imports some of these Barefoot Power products into his community. But unfortunately, even though there was a lot of demand, he was only able to order a small amount of product because he didn't have the funds to buy bigger amounts, not only to meet the demand, but also to bring his costs down. So with the Kiva loan, we worked through Barefoot Power, and with the Kiva loan, he was able to buy more product and meet the demand and also bring down his costs. So that's just one example of how we're working with small, medium enterprises and trying to work with more of these non-traditional partners to bring sustainable technologies in the world. And then the second kind of related area of work is Kiva is really doing a lot of work with mobile and in different ways, and this is another new area for us. We started a beta program called Kiva Zip, and that's about peer-to-peer lending. And in Kenya specifically, we're using mobile to administer the loans and get repayments. And this is just an experiment we're starting with, but it's now open alpha, so you can go to Kiva Zip and make a loan directly. And then just in general, whether it's giving loans to people in communities who are trying to provide more mobile usage and retailers, that's another area of technology. So Kiva's kind of in the sustainable part of this framework and this discussion, but we're excited to really work with people that you're hearing here who are out in the field and really doing innovative things. So, thanks.
Well, with that, maybe hold on to the microphone, because I'm going to direct the first question to you. When we were preparing for this, we had a tremendous amount of really cool discussion. I want to try to get as much of it out to you guys as possible. And one of the things that, Sonali, you talked about was the need for all of us to think less parochially about the development process of some of these products and technologies, and more in kind of a traditional product development sense. In other words, thinking of people less as victims and more as customers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I seem to like to talk in examples a lot, so I hope that's helpful. But as Kiva has evolved, we've had to evolve not only to meet the needs of our lenders and people who come to our website, but actually those people who need loans. And in order to do that, not all borrowers are alike. We're in 70 countries now. We've given loans to about 900,000 borrowers, all with very, very different needs. I love that wow. Can I maybe get a double wow? I said this earlier. We're funding basically $7 million in loans a week, thanks to you. So I say we, but it's the lenders that are really doing that. So it's amazing scale. But as we grow, we want to really increase our social impact. And what that's required us to do is really look at who are the unbanked and where can we serve where maybe traditional microfinance isn't quite getting to. So for example, there are farmers in rural areas who really have just very different seasonality. They may not have collateral. Another example is students who may need a longer term loan because they won't be able to pay it off until later. They may not have credit history. So clean energy, clean water, farmers, rural areas, vulnerable groups, all these users who can definitely use loans are people and individuals whose businesses and their daily lives have very different requirements, and that's really caused Kiva to look for partners and to even look at, so a lot of our partners are now NGOs and small, medium-sized enterprises as opposed to the traditional banks, because we're realizing that these end users have very different needs that maybe a microfinance institution wouldn't serve. So we're still working with the microfinance institutions and doing great work with them, but to serve these different customers to really expand, we had to think of these users in different ways.
Will, you had some really interesting thoughts when we were talking about this, about the fact that maybe we've got it backwards sometimes in terms of thinking about how technology flows either in or out. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I was just about to say that I think Kiva is a really wonderful example of an organization that's developing local innovators, people who are creating the solutions that are for themselves. And I think this is something that has totally changed in the last 6 or 5 years when we think about technology and development. I'm a little biased because I work at Google, but the thing that that I am inspired by and I think about for the next 5 to 10 years, there's several billion people who are just coming online for the first time. And it's going to be really wonderful to see those billions of people become contributors. Like, they're going to generate knowledge. They're going to be on the internet. They're going to be on Facebook. They're going to be tweeting. But they're also going to be able to now start solving problems and sort of be a part of global solutions. So I'm really excited about that. That's just on a very meta level. On a very practical level, though, one thing I'm really excited about are Fab Labs. So Neil Gershenfeld's group, the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, they've started this movement in the last sort of 5 years, which they call Fab Labs. Fab Labs have 3D printers, laser cutters, all these different rapid prototyping tools that allow you to create many different types of things. And they literally have their lab as like sort of a trailer. And the number of these labs, they literally just started 3 or 4 years ago. There are now several hundred of them across the world. They're in Baghdad, they're in Afghanistan, they're in Yemen, they're in Saudi Arabia. They're all over the place. And what's cool is it's not just providing the tools, not just allowing people to create things, but it's also networking all of those people in all of those different locations so they can communicate together. One really cool thing I saw when I was in college, I worked with an organization, I went to Duke, and I worked with an organization down in Wilmington, North Carolina. They were called the Full Belly Project. They made appropriate technologies focused on agro-processing. But they were really cool in terms of they made really interesting technologies. They allowed sort of people who made peanuts to shell their own peanuts. It's really neat, like really amazing. From me as like a mechanical engineer, I always like super geek out that they're using concrete to make machines. Anyway, but the coolest thing about Full Belly Project was they started networking these local innovators in different countries. So this is back sort of like in 2007, 2006, so sort of before this whole Fab Lab thing. But they were getting people together who were from Mali, who were from Guatemala, who were sort of needed to shell peanuts in all these different places, and sort of getting those sort of local innovators together to talk amongst themselves. So anyway.
Well, I want to talk specifically about one of these examples. You brought some attention to it, Alla, in regards to egg and how it's working in Tanzania. But there's been some, call it learning in that cycle that you alluded to in your opening statement, that to me was fascinating in your organization's ability to adapt to that. I'm wondering if maybe you could bring some of that to light.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest learnings for me personally, probably for the rest of the team, has been the need to stay nimble and flexible and to constantly reevaluate and find ways to adapt and tweak in order to sustain the operations and improve them and make sure that the customer end need is served. So I already mentioned that the idea was initially solar and then went to batteries, and now we're integrating solar again. So now we have kind of 2 business lines. Something else that we were quite surprised by was that we had initially intended with the battery swapping infrastructure to just kind of be at the end of the line, be swapping and develop the partnerships with distributors, and that we would outsource certain functions like actual electrical installations of the electrical system. But we found that there was no trained sort of workforce that was able to do that. So we were kind of puzzled and tried to figure out how to do this, and decided, okay, well, we have to take this in-house. So we brought in some folks who are savvy in electrical installations engineers who were able to develop a training program, and now it takes us about a week to train an electrical technician, and then they're ready to go. And something we're very proud of is the quality of our installations and the look and feel of those. Something else that we also were kind of going back to the idea of kind of treating your end user as a customer rather than a beneficiary. It kind of relates to how we changed some of our initial assumptions and tweaked our strategy. Has to do with how we are dealing with our sales process. We had initially really intended we believed that it would be really pull-based, so we would, create a number of installations in some of the more powerful households who had influence, whether it's the village chief or another like well-known entrepreneur, and they would have that like overhead light, security light over in front, and it would be very visible. And we thought, well, it's such a basic need. If folks see that in their village, they would clearly want to come and seek our service, but unfortunately it wasn't that easy. So we really, over the last 2 years, have put a lot of effort into our branding. Our salespeople now wear these really cool orange shirts have really put a lot of effort actually in the last several months into training our sales force, because we have, in addition to the battery swap and the solar system, we also sell some products like mobile phone chargers and or adapters and even TVs, and which was a big demand during the World Cup. Everybody wanted to buy a TV. So now we have really tried to simplify the sales process and train our salespeople on how to communicate with the customer, and also have created a more robust role for our distributors, instead of just kind of delivering the batteries to them and having them kind of do that last mile distribution to their customers. They also serve as our spokespeople, and we have incentives for them to actually bring in additional customers. In terms of, just wanted to make another quick comment on the digitizing, or kind of the transfer of technology. One thing that Egg has been a huge beneficiary of, sort of some of the amazing technological innovations that are happening all over the world, and have been deployed in developing markets, is that one of the things we're doing is using mobile payments to receive the fees for our services. And we just brought on a really great software engineer who is trying to integrate all of our operations, so that we try to get rid of the paper. We're very kind of antiquated in some ways on the ground, because we use a lot of paper. Like we take it takes like a lot of steps, from like taking the customer name to the battery tracking number, and then taking back to the back office and having somebody input it. And now we're trying to create the seamless integration of the technology is available, to have our guys on the ground use tablets to enter the name. We have a GPS scanner, so we know exactly where the batteries are. We GPS track the homes where the customers live, and you can enter all this information in a very simple, just for somebody who may not be very literate, just a very simple interface where they can enter the customer's name, type it in on the tablet, and it all kind of feeds into our back-end database. So I'm really excited about integrating some of these innovations, and we have a really talented team that is working on making sure that we have the data, so that we can analyze the data in real time, that we can really understand customer behavior and adjust accordingly some of our offerings, and also know where the batteries are at all times. So it's really exciting that we're able to kind of integrate all these things in a pretty simple, otherwise simple kind of distribution model.
So, there's a theme developing here, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys for questions in just 1 second. I just want to mention one more thing and give Will a chance to talk about it for just a quick second. And that is that in some ways, the way that we have approached using technology in developing economies has been effective. In some ways it has not. The things that the panelists are saying is that we need to approach this from a business standpoint, like we would any fundamental business, not in a dramatically different and parochial sort of way. But on the other hand, there are some unique challenges that will always be a factor in that environment. And with that, I wanted to ask you, Will, because we had some kind of interesting discussion yesterday about whether or not the use of the term appropriate technology is really helping us or not. Because everyone, I don't know what your thought is, but when I hear about it, I always think of the handbook that they hand out to the Peace Corps guys that say, here's how you splint somebody's leg when you don't have any supplies. And in a way, that mindset may be limiting us.
Yeah, I think it is. And I say that, I don't know if you all are familiar with this concept of appropriate technology. It sort of started in the 60s and 70s. I think there is a book by E.F. Schumacher, who was an economist at the time, sort of a cold economist, and he talked about the benefit of going really small and integrating he called it intermediate technology, sort of not what people are using now, but not super high technology. They're sort of an in-between. And there's a lot of things about that are totally true. Like, if you're going to implement a technology in a rural area, it has to adapt into the way people live. You can't, go in and put a car or a big machine there. If you can't maintain it, it's just going to fail. So that's totally true. But I think the one thing that movement sort of espoused was you had to adapt the technology for that, only that specific community, and there had to be like community ownership. And I think it was sort of against, it was also sort of against this like more corporate like product development model. So where I would, you know, try and find a market need, develop a technology or a product or a service that sort of meets that market need, and then work on sales and distribution to get it out there. And that was clearly not a part. It was about, there was supposed to be community ownership. There was no concept of a franchise or an entrepreneur. So just very specifically with my background, I was in an organization, I was president of an organization here at Duke called Engineers Without Borders, where I worked on a lot of these appropriate technology projects. We made some of those nutshellers. We made rainwater harvesting tanks. We did biomass charcoal, so that's taking agricultural waste and turning it into charcoal. It was all really cool, and it was mostly from these concepts of it had to adapt and be adopted by these local communities, and they had some minimal impact, but I always felt like we were just a drop in a huge bucket, and it wasn't big enough, and we were not even considering how to, like from the get-go, we weren't thinking how could we build this technology for scale. So that and many other reasons is why I decided I wanted to work at somewhere that has a lot of scale, which is Google. So,
well, you know, in our discussion yesterday, the cell phone is the model for what defeats this mindset. Yeah. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, people aspire to have a cell phone. If they can't afford it or it doesn't work, that doesn't mean that they don't want it.
Yeah.
They don't want old landlines.
Yeah, yeah. I would say now the way I think about this, and I'm a technologist, so I think about technology, is I think about if I were starting a company that was targeting an emerging market, I would think, okay, what are rapidly changing technologies that everywhere in the world, whether it's rapidly cheaper or rapidly more accessible or rapidly new capabilities. So things like cell phone telephony, social networking, SMS, all these sort of, the ability now to do computation, as you were saying, in all these local places. If you think about that, and then it sounds weird, but you can now do computation in many places in the world that you never could do computation before. So what can you do with that? So those are the ways I would approach the problem now, from let's leverage something that's rapidly different than it was 5 years ago.
Okay, so what's on your mind? Questions from out here. There's a lot of experience in terms of deploying technology. Good time to mine it.
I don't have a question. I'm just a microphone guy.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Kellen. I'm an undergrad senior, and I spent this past summer in Uganda actually doing some environmental consulting type work for a social development organization, and I found it infuriating. It was so difficult for me to be there, and I felt completely ineffective and just totally overwhelmed and just completely disillusioned. Like I had been disillusioned, and honestly, I just wanted to hear from you guys what you think it is that gets lost or gained in translation between our world and the developing world, because honestly I think there's a huge schism. I think that we make a lot of assumptions on our end, and we take a lot for granted, even just like community-based principles, like people working together, collaboration. In my experience when I was there, it just doesn't really exist. I mean, it almost doesn't. So I just wanted to hear from each of you, like what your experiences have been on that front.
Well, I know I can tell you that one of the first things that has to change is our business mindset about the time frame that success should be measured. And this was a struggle for me when I took over in Fiji Water, because I had masters just like everyone does that say everything is measured in quarters and years and dollars. But in many places without deep business experience and without a sense of business cycles, that concept, it's not that it can't be adapted, it's just very immature. And so when we go somewhere and think that we're going to deliver impact in a matter of weeks, that by itself is a bias that we carry with us that says, well, this is what I intend to accomplish. And what really is missing from that, and it's very difficult for us that have spent our life in business, is to go there with some ideas, but also to go there with a lot of patience. I know I sat cross-legged for more than a year before I had any true impact in any local community, and that's because it took that long to develop enough credible relationship to where you could have the kind of communication that was necessary to even address the problems you're talking about. And if you attempt to do that before you have that relationship, at least in the cultures that I was in, you might be greeted with polite indifference, which then makes it feel helpless. And it's really a matter of recalibrating your expectations along the lines of time. Curious to know about you guys' experience here.
Yeah, I'd really like to echo, Jim, everything that you're saying. I mean, one of the things that Egg has confronted was that there were a lot of kind of touch-go projects in the communities where we work, and people have come and tried to deploy, whether it's solar or some kind of water purification system, and then kind of leave. So we had to not only introduce our service and kind of build trust, but also overcome some of the negative perceptions that have already been ingrained. And that remains a challenge. And one of the things that we're trying to do now is kind of really offer a holistic service. So, you know, two things. One is that, you know, the microfinance infrastructure in the communities where we work doesn't really exist, but it's a huge barrier to adoption to have upfront capital outlay reduced. So we're doing a small pilot internally, and we're hoping that we might find a partner like Kiva or somebody else who might help us administer it, because it's quite administratively heavy. And then on the aftercare piece, we're trying to price into our offering, but also just price services to ensure that the longevity of the service and that people believe that we're not just going to leave, and that we'll stick around and we'll offer this. You know, the solar panel needs repair, or it needs to be, like, dust has to be dusted off in order for it to be the most efficient. The timing has really been a big lesson. We had thought that at this point we would have, you know, 40 stations and like thousands of customers, and almost 4 years in we have 800, and we believe that we're making the kind of relationships and the traction and the partnerships that take also almost a year to a year and a half to nurture. We just you know, struck a partnership with a manufacturing company where we're going to set up a charging spot in their factory, so it's very convenient for the employees who want our service to come to drop off the battery at the end of the day and get a new one. But that took a really long time to nurture, and it's actually one of the biggest growth strategies that we have to develop more of those relationships, but we know that it takes a really, really long time. And I think really integrating local employees is critically important. So we have the majority of our salespeople and technicians are all local, and we're going to start to actually bring in some more senior executives, and we're really hoping to find somebody who speaks Swahili, who understands the cultural nuances, and is, you know, just really savvy with the kind of cultural nuances that are critical to understand to be successful and to really help the people that we're intending to help.
You know, they had a name for this in Fiji. They called it Bula shit. Bula is what they say, you know, it's kind of hello and goodbye, and, you know, it's like aloha, but they adopted the other part from us, and it was basically people who came to do what they wanted to do. And when that's what they would call a project like that, which was done on the time frame of the people who came to do it, not on the time frame of the people who were supposedly supposed to be on the other end of it. Now, all of this feeds a parochial model that we've been talking about moving away from in general. I found anyway to be part of the problem. What we're coming to do is bring our knowledge and skills and apply them in the same way that we would here. The context may be different, but the process should feel a lot the same. At least that's what I think I hear us saying.
I just wanted to speak up because I wanted to give you some encouragement. But I spoke a little bit about this before, but we do have a Kiva Fellows program. And honestly, not every fellow that goes into the field has this amazing experience. And what we've done is taken more time to really set expectations that it's tough. It's a challenge. You're going into a different country with a partner who may or may not accept right away the knowledge that you have, and we don't have a guidebook necessarily for the work you're going to do and the partners you're going to work with. So it is hard. That being said, we have really worked closely with our partners over time and seen them really figure out what they seek our experience in. So one thing that I find a lot of countries are looking to, some of the work we've done is just around innovation. So to your point about process, they're not looking necessarily for what are the innovations you're doing, but they want to teach their young people how to innovate. So how do you even think like that? And there's even programs where they're funding that kind of thinking, but it's hard. I'm going to Indonesia next week to visit a couple of our partners, or the week after next, and I'm spending 3 of the days training 2 of the employees on product management process, because that's what I do. I do product management. So that's another case of, yeah, we're trying to enable those organizations or companies with the knowledge that we have. That being said, who knows what I'm going to find when I get there. Another of the partners I'm visiting next week, they had emailed saying, hey, we'd love for you and the 2 people I'm traveling with to help build an MIS system for that organization. Now, what I found out yesterday is most of the staff has no access to computers. So the MIS system is really, okay, what is the operational process that will work for them to administer all these loans? So we're with you, but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to apply all the great learnings that you guys have. So don't give up on social impact.
Behind you.
This question is directed more to Alla. I'm running a similar type of project on a pilot basis in Pakistan with solar energy. And one of the problems I'm facing is, as you said, it takes a lot of time to get through all the different risks, figure out the different adjustments you need to make to the business. And given the amount of time it takes, and you have a large team on the ground, what kind of advice would you have on how to get through that lengthier period of time between proving feasibility to actually getting a stable amount of revenue coming in? And I think, as Will was alluding to, I think he's working within Google, someone who has much deeper pockets to launch these types of projects. So if either of you also have other perspectives on how these smaller types of businesses can tap into larger financing in order to get through these early stages. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. EGG has been really excellent at tapping into various resources and mentor networks, and we had 3 different alumni networks and kind of resources of the universities that we really leveraged, like in terms of both capital and mentorship. We also have been very aggressive in that kind of first 2 years before we just got our equity investment into going after a lot of social impact investment type grants from foundations, from USAID, from like the Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund. I imagine there'll probably be similar vehicles for funding in Pakistan and around. The kind of realization that I think a lot of us have made, we really wanted to be completely market driven, and we didn't want to take grant capital, but when you really think about the energy sector in developed markets, it is heavily supported by government funds. And given that it's in this like public good, sort of like healthcare and food, I think a lot of us have kind of come to rethink that. We will only be 100%, private sector oriented in terms of where our capital comes from, and not just in the strategies of how we operate the business. So I'd encourage you to, and I'm happy to talk to you about specific capital kind of pools that you might try to consider, and even trying to go to an angel investor who really believes in what you're doing, who might be okay losing this money, but really believes in wants to empower the effort that you're undertaking, would be very good. But it is very tough, and you have to sustain your own, and you have to be okay yourself. That's really important. So, but I'm happy to talk to you about specific areas. And we won a bunch of business plan competitions. I'd actually encourage you to apply to those, and that even if you don't actually win, you get a lot of connections who may eventually lead to whether it's a hire or a partner or or a source of money that you can leverage before you are able to earn revenue to support the operations.
What's your thoughts on expectations here?
So the most relevant experience I've had is I worked at a company called Embrace. They make low-cost incubators. They're based in Bangalore. They've gotten a lot of press, so you guys may have, they're really cute. Anyway, they had a really interesting, they had the same problem. Oh, sorry, for little babies, for premature babies. Yeah, good question. Not vaccines, not something else, yeah. Anyway, so they came out of Stanford maybe in like 2007, 2008, and they were having the very same problem. How do we raise funds for this? They were all from the design school. A couple of them were business school students, and they wanted it to make it a for-profit, but they were having trouble raising. So they basically, between 2007 and 2011, they sort of had a nonprofit and a for-profit. And the CEO, Jane, she spent most of her time just raising capital from the nonprofit side. So getting private, mostly through the Stanford network, and just sort of private donations. And that fund raised almost all of the amount of money they needed to do R&D in order to get to a first version of the product. They actually changed in 2011. And they started working where they had the nonprofit did sole licensing of the technology to a for-profit, and then the for-profit company started taking sort of very similar type of investments that Alla was describing. I think from Coastal Ventures as a social impact fund, they got a lot of money from in order to further commercialize, do the distribution, manufacturing, things like that.
There's a question up here.
Yeah, my name is Ian Vermeer. I run the Edge Center here in the business school, and I'm interested in. Yes, I'm interested in this. Sort of the holy grail of marketing is know the unmet needs of your customer. But I think we go with a lot of presuppositions when we go into emerging markets about what an unmet need is. And just from my own experience, I was shocked when I started working in water projects to realize that there actually is not a lot of sort of really ingrained demand for clean water, and it's sort of perplexing what that means. It may be that they never had clean water to know what the benefits of that would be. It's certainly clear that when you get a cell phone, you know what value you're getting, but you can't see that the water is not clean, and you get clean water. It's hard to put a value on that. So and there's a million examples in this space about the presuppositions about what the needs are or the priorities are actually don't play out in the ground. I wonder, based on your experience, examples where you were either dumbfounded by the actual needs or perceived needs or prioritization of your customers or the customers of the people you work with, or the ways that you kind of navigate in thinking about those questions without bringing your own set of assumptions to bear.
I can go first. In terms of the practical ways to get around that, I really like the human-centered design approach, which means that you don't come in with a sort of set of assumptions. You may make a hypothesis about what technology or product you want to create, what's the market need, but it's really about understanding the users, seeing what their problems are. Embrace did that really well. The company I worked for, they spent an incredible number of times with mothers, with doctors, in order to, they literally had like 20 to 25 iterations of their warmer. So that's one way to tackle that problem. I think, water is a challenging one. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about, but I've not been able to crack that nut. When you don't understand microbiology and what a germ is, it's hard to understand that it needs to go from, oh, it looks clean, it tastes good, and oh yeah, but there's still bacteria, viruses, and protozoa that are going to kill you. So that's hard to understand. Anyway, I think it's going to take some really amazing social marketing in order to get that concept across. So I don't have an answer for that one.
You're asking about things that stunned you. When I was in Kenya, we spent the better part of a year putting in a pipeline to move water using a solar pump array more than 8 kilometers to a village, and I was doing this on behalf of Paul Allen. And he was desperate to try to make sure that this water was accessible to not only the development that he had purchased, but to the community that surrounded it. It was a very noble objective. And so we spent all this time putting in this pump infrastructure, huge solar array to drive it, because it had to go almost 10 kilometers and about 600 feet of head, so it was a very big pump. And then put that in, keep it from being trampled by elephants in terms of all kinds of weird things we had to do to keep the elephants out of it. And then we bring it to the village, and 2 weeks after I was there, they had opened all the tanks to create a giant pond for the cows to use. And because to the Maasai, the cows are the most valuable asset they have. And so all of this effort went to making sure that the cows had a place to play, but at that point the water had essentially been contaminated. And we had to wind up going back, and it was a combination of both education and also cultural awareness, trying to help them understand that we should put a small pond, if we're going to do that, up here that people can draw their water from, and the big pond can still be for the cows. And ultimately, it gets to your point, which is our proposition about the fact that these people were desperate to get this clean water at the top of this hill was true to a point, but not the point we thought.
It was the cows.
The cows were very happy.
I think for egg, we kind of imagined that displacing kerosene better, by just having LED lights was the most important. But we had a lot of customers who had a little bit more kind of free cash to spend. I wouldn't say free cash, a little bit more to spend. And they would come to us and they requested bigger batteries to support TVs. I mean, I mentioned that earlier, but that was kind of a surprise. But not really a surprise, because we all want some basic things. We want to be connected to the world, and we also had folks who wanted to start mobile phone charging businesses, so they also wanted a bigger battery that would support that, not just their own individual use, especially for some of the regions that were farther away.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, so what I think is interesting about the current evolution of Kiva is we see exactly what you're saying, and now we expect that there's going to be a lot of learning, and so we're trying to focus more on bringing capital to risky endeavors, because a lot of experimentation is required to even figure out what the need is. Something that a lot of us at Kiva have been reading lately is a book by Eric Ries called Lean Startup, and that is really about not only the unknown solution, but the unknown problem and the thinking process to find that market fit. So that's just one framework that we found really, the Lean Startup. So it's really, he talks a lot about startup and technology startup software, but really the concepts really apply when you think about, the fundamental principles that he's talking about. It's a lot about experimentation, taking small bets, how to build, measure, and learn, and keeping that cycle going until you find the market fit. And that, I think that strategy or that framework is really, works really well for these types of situations where you don't even know what the customer needs.
Yeah, that has started to make its way into the vernacular, because now, even though I try to avoid venture funding at all turns, occasionally when you're dealing with venture, their metrics are starting to be based about whether you have unrealistic expectations of this whole kind of business model development process. And if you think that you're going to solve the problem too quickly, it starts to scare them away. So that kind of thinking has started to pervade a lot of the capitalization. We had some questions over here.
Look, just as an older person, I'll just throw in my perspective. I've got a big mouth. I don't need a speaker. One of the biggest issues we have as in our American culture is the short-sighted nature of how we behave. We're very short-term oriented. We love the next best thing, and it's a double-edged sword because it makes us very creative, but it also makes us move on and forget to sustain things. Sustainability doesn't come easy to us. The most colossal example, I think, that all of us can probably relate to, even you young folks, is Iraq, which we went into 10 years ago with this notion that in a matter of months, we would completely remove the existing government and install an American-style democracy with American-style local government, and oh, it was going to be so easy. And it's a massive failure. And it's cost, you know, the costs have been absolutely, it was an enormous mistake. They didn't give a crap about the American style of living, and they weren't interested in being like us. And, you know, we really struggled with that. So, you know, on a very large scale, that's not unlike what you run into in these small places. Okay, that's my story.
I'm not going to have any of you comment on that.
I'm Sharice Barsell from the Keenan Flagler Business School. I had
brave.
Proud to be here. I have a couple of questions about Kiva. So I find your new initiative very interesting, the Kiva Zip, and I'm wondering how you make people accountable for actually spending the money where they're going to spend it. And then my second question is regarding, right now you currently do loans, and there's a lot of research saying that savings is actually more effective, and I'm wondering if you've been looking at going into savings as well.
Sure. So around Kiva Zip, again, I think I mentioned a little bit, but for people who aren't familiar with Kiva, you know, I mentioned that we work with organizations or banks in different countries, and when you see the borrower profiles on our website, the partners have selected those borrowers. Often they've already pre-dispersed those loans to the borrowers, and this is kind of backfilling. With Kiva Zip, we're experimenting with real peer-to-peer lenders with a trustee involved. So, for example, perhaps there's a church leader who has someone in who he knows needs a loan. So he would serve as a trustee for this borrower on our website. And what we're moving towards, to answer your question about this, being able to ensure that the money is used in the right place, is actually we are thinking that Kiva, if we want to really democratize this access to capital, we are striving towards a more open marketplace. So yes, we will see the repayment rates come through, and that'll in and of itself at least prove that, you know, they're using the funding to do something that then enables them to pay back the loan, but really having less control. So it's up to the lenders who come to the website to look at the profile of the borrower, see what their business plan is, see if they believe that what they're doing is, you know, worth the money that they're spending. And so you'll see things on Kiva Zip that we're experimenting with, like conversations. So Kiva Zip is really allowing the lenders to talk directly to the borrowers, which, you know, you can't so often do with our microfinance partners. So it's kind of flipping on the head and saying, hey, we're not going to be the ones that are really watching over these borrowers and really make it open. And then to your second question about, what was your second question? Oh yeah, savings, sorry. So we aren't ourselves yet thinking about going to savings, but certainly when we have visioning conversation, there's a lot of other products and helpful things even related just to finance for all our partners. What we have done is last year or the year before, we worked on social performance badges, and this kind of also speaks to right now thinking about the lender community and then thinking about the partners, and the partners have very different views on the world, and they honestly have no idea what the lenders want. That doesn't mean they don't want to make what they're doing appealing to lenders, but they actually don't know. So we went in with our own methodology, because there was nothing out there, to really look at the details of all our partners and pull out where their strengths are. So whether it was providing services like this, now you can go on our website and see which of our partners provide those kind of solutions. Which of our partners are really doing a lot of innovation? Which of our partners are reaching the really most rural areas? So it's really about enabling our partners right now to do some of those things, but definitely things like mobile technology, being able to allow us to give loans to people to kind of pay as they go, is then enabling them to have savings. So there's some direct relationship to that in Cuba.
We could maybe talk about this afterwards, but part of what we did with the Fiji Water Foundation was some amount of non-gapped microfinance funding in the communities we were at, and particularly with regards to empowering women and collectively finding groups of women, helping them build a community that has a foundation before money starts flowing through it, and then using that as a vehicle to both save funds and then also as an arbiter for what those funds should be invested in terms of whose business case is the right one. And that's fraught with all kinds of issues that are too lengthy to talk about here. But there's both goods and bads that we learn from that.
Hi, my name is Mark Hugh. I am a second year here at Fuqua. I used to work in international development. It strikes me that we're seeing a progression right now, this ebb and flow between centralization, focus on institutions, to decentralization, innovation. You see that in USAID funding, those sort of things. And I'm wondering, first of all, if I think that's a good thing overall, but if you think that we're shifting a little too far in that direction, and in that sense, are we deprioritizing too much the importance of investing in institution building? To build those sort of things that allow things to scale? And then secondly, do you see folks, say from a product management design background, with a similar enthusiasm for trying to bring some of that innovative thinking into behavioral change, systems change, those sort of things?
Who's ready to answer that one?
Go ahead. Okay, I'll go first because then I can have the shortest answer and then they can fill in the gaps. I definitely think about, Kiva is, I think, working with, I mean, there are some institutions we're working with, but I think we're providing incremental development to areas that institutions haven't been serving. So I think there's, to the point of unmet market need, that's where we're really trying to see where does our unique capital, because, you know, Kiva lender community, we're not giving them an interest rate, so it's really, you know, cost-effective capital. It's a group crowdfunding model, so really risk tolerant. You know, if you lose 2 cents on your $25, it's probably okay. So there's just certain things about this funding that really makes sense for the decentralized kind of world, but I don't think that's displacing the institutional work. Now, whether there is decentralization, you know, I think they can answer too. But even in the U.S., where we launched last year, I think there's all this energy around crowdfunding and, you know, different concepts that kind of are fit well with decentralization. I personally don't think even those things are necessarily going to replace some of the bigger, more coordinated efforts that are going on, but will really just help the individuals.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think that there are large institutions that have allocated certain pools of capital and resources in terms of talent and people. So for example, USAID has this Development Innovation Ventures group that they kind of try to be very methodical about supporting social ventures or nonprofits that are trying to tackle some challenges where their other programs don't touch. Just to Sonali's point, and they're trying to be very methodical about, you know, giving first $100,000 grant, and should you hit your metrics, then they will go in and trying to use kind of like the venture capital model or the more kind of results-oriented model, that just because you received the first one doesn't mean that you'll receive the second one unless you've achieved certain results. And I also think that, and I'd like to see more of this, and this is something that Like Energy has been trying to figure out, is kind of creating more partnerships with larger companies or larger institutional partners that have the deep relationships and networks in some of these sectors. And for example, you know, we just got an investment from GDF Suez, and they have all sorts of talent, and they're going to, you know, deploy people for like a 2-week session to like train our team in certain areas, even finance or some of the technical product innovation that we're trying to do in selecting additional products that we're going to distribute through the networks that we've built. I know a company like Schneider Electric, for example, on the energy side, they have this BIPBOP program where they really prioritize access to energy, and they have some of their own products, but they're also funding external small organizations that are trying to do this kind of work. So I'd say that, you know, sometimes the pendulum swings one way or another, but I think there are ways that some of these organizations are finding to partner with each other, and I'd say it's a good thing that you have both kind of like the bottom-up kind of strategies and folks going out there taking big risks and spending years of their life, you know, with their heart trying to help some of these communities and build solutions. But I don't think the bigger institutional players are going anywhere, and they're also putting a lot of effort and a lot of capital and talent to addressing these things. So I think it's a good balance. I wouldn't say that we're going too much in the direction of smaller guys.
Yeah, this is a question I struggled with tremendously when I was working. I think I feel like it's sort of an open question. Places like rural Uganda or rural India, will there ever be centralized infrastructure, or will it always be distributed infrastructure? I'm not sure. When I was working on these distributed water systems, that was a question in my mind. I was like, okay, I'm making these solutions so that it can work in this community. It's like a small scale, but like, you know, back home in North Carolina, we have these gigantic water purification systems. Like, why am I building this if this is going to be different in 30 years? But I'm not sure if it is. I think it's a great point that technologies are now enabling networks of people to provide infrastructure. So in the developed world, like every hot startup in Silicon Valley is about sharing your car or like whatever, sharing tools and things like that. And I think there is something to that though. So I don't have an answer. I think it's a really interesting question about whether it will be, particularly in infrastructure, water, energy systems, will be centralized or decentralized. Aside from that, though, it's clearly true that important institutions, legal institutions that work, government, democracy, are essential. And even with, like, let's say we were able to create lots of social enterprises and for-profit businesses that are able to supply, you know, financial needs, water needs, energy needs, healthcare. There's still that core environment that has to be, that enables all of those things. So, yeah, I again, don't really have an answer, but it's obviously important.
All right, so I want to do two things. One, I want to just mention to you that on your question, when I was in Fiji, we basically just made the decision that we could not assume that the infrastructure and the institutions were going to be effective, and we moved out with that assumption, which is not the same as to say we didn't want that to happen. But the development of the foundation we put in and the strategy we put in was you have to make a call about whether or not you're doing something, as, for instance, you guys have wired in such a way that it can be able to meet that emerging technology. That costs money, and it has to be a strategic decision you make at the beginning. We did the opposite. We said we need to assume that when we develop a water resource for a community, that's the only one they're going to get. And therefore, we're going to scale that appropriately, and we're going to try to develop a sustainment model for that, assuming that there's nothing coming on the other side. I don't know that it was right or wrong. I only provide that as perspective. Second thing I want to do is I want to give each one of you guys a chance to say any last words. And one thing I would encourage you to do is remember that we were all, you know, sitting here not long ago, and all of us have had different levels of experience. But one thing you might think about talking about is, what would you have wished you knew when you were sitting out there about this particular topic, which is, you know, could be going any direction.
Does anyone else want to go first? Oh, are you sure I don't have something on my mind? Let me think about that for a second. This is probably going to sound lame, but whatever, I'll go for it. So when I started, I don't think I realized how important it was to have colleagues, like in arms, I guess, when I was working on this stuff. Like trying to come up with solutions for water and energy and finance, it's really hard. I mean, these are like the hardest problems in the world to solve, and no one's solving them. So you fail a lot. And so I failed so many times while I was working on it. And at least for me, I didn't realize that, you know, I guess at the front end, I was about to take a path where I was going to fail repeatedly. So I think I did a good job of sort of having a lot of other people that I was doing it with. And I think that's probably the only reason why I continued to keep working on it, because I had other people I was failing with and other people I could talk to and who are also really trying to make, to do something in these areas. So if you're doing it alone, you're probably going to fail, and it's a lot easier to fail with friends than to fail by yourself. So
yeah, but for you, you've been able to turn it into a career. Now you get to fail things every day.
Yeah, exactly. Woo. So.
Is that on? Okay. I think it's important to assess kind of your risk appetite. And, for me personally, I had already spent a significant amount of time in sub-Saharan Africa, and after graduating, I actually went to the ES Corporation, which is a big power generation distribution company, and after spending some time at Calvert, but I wanted to get that experience in the bigger company to kind of really understand power generation from kind of the top-down perspective, and kind of really be involved with like energy and kind of see what I can translate, the learnings that I could translate to the bottom-up approach. Others on the team, like our CEO, Jamie Yang, he has been on the ground since he got his PhD in nuclear engineering, trying to figure this out since 2009. And I think it's just important to assess where your comfort level is and where I think everybody has their own kind of internal meter. And there are other personal considerations and family and everything else that, you can have an impact from lots of different levers, and my personal one has been kind of building partnerships, raising the capital, representing the company at events like this, and recruiting really wonderful people, including Kirsten. I don't know if she's in the room, but she, is one of our fellows, and it has brought me a lot of personal satisfaction. But I think I've also been able to kind of bring the kinds of resources to the company that I wasn't able to provide personally, and I think it's just important to understand what you're willing to do, and at which point. Not what you're willing to do, but where your comfort level is and where do you see yourself geographically and from a functional standpoint. And it takes a lot of discovery and self-reflection. I think it's important to take that now that there's time and you have kind of the room to think about it and do that internal reflection.
Okay, I still haven't thought of anything that's different than what they said, so maybe I should have gone first. So I went to business school, so I was seated in a slightly different place, but similar. And I really was excited about moving out of, I was in automotive before I went to business school, and I was really excited about social entrepreneurship. And I went to business school, and there was no social entrepreneurship class. So I tapped the founder, one of the co-founders of Ethos Water, and worked with him on developing a class. And then the next quarter, worked with him on some things he was going to publish, a book he was going to publish. And what I wish I knew is, even though there is a very complex world, and especially in social impact, it's so nascent, it's just beginning, so there's going to be a lot of failures. I wish I really understood also how much opportunity there is, and even though I knew there was a lot of excitement about it, I knew that, okay, there's these brands like Kiva, or there's these corporate social responsibility type efforts at these different organizations. I mean, the layers are pretty deep. So I'll use Kiva as an example. I mean, I've been there 2 years, and I still feel like I'm ramping up. But that also means there's so much opportunity. So going to things like conferences like this, getting on the net impact boards, even as a professional, they do a lot of different meetups and things like that, but really talking about what people are doing on the ground, even though it's complex, like turning that into, okay, how do I apply myself there? Because there is so much room for everyone to make an impact, even though when you're first looking at it, you're like, wait, is this really making a social impact? How good of an impact?